This poem is New Year's Letter to Friends by David Clewell, and I know all of you know that feeling when you're at the end of a year and you find yourself thinking, like, where did all the time go, and is this really the best that life has to offer me? And maybe you didn't follow through on some of your New Year's resolutions, or maybe you just had a lot of things not go right for you. And I think that this poem perfectly encapsulates and addresses that common feeling that we all have. And through Clewell's poem, he makes a theme very clear when he highlights how even though you may have a lot of bad years, or even though you may have a bad year or several, they will always be a part of you and make you who you are. And eventually, there will be light at the end of the tunnel. And I find this especially relevant now considering our current situation. So here is the poem. New Year's Eve Letter to Friends. Every year the odds are stacked against it turning out the way you'd like. A year of smooth, a year of easy smile, a year like a lake you could float on, looking up at a blue year of soothing sky. Mostly the letters you're expecting never come. Lovers walk out and keep going, and in no time they're no friends of yours. Mostly the sheer weight of days gone awfully wrong, a tire blown out, someone's heart caving in, the hole worn finally through the roof. Sometimes it's only a few tenacious cells digging in against complete dissolve. The smallest strand of DNA stretched thin over thousands of years goes taut and finally holds. I've watched men at the mission staring out into the middle distance, putting up with the latest version of salvation, all the time wondering just how long until the bowl and spoon. They've been around enough to know the good part's always saved for last, and there's no promise they won't make it there. Each year cuts our lives down to size, to something we can almost use. So we find it somewhere in our hearts. Another ring shows up when we lay open the cross-section. One more hard line in the hand spreading slowly out of its clench. It used to be the world was so small you could walk out to the end of it and back in a single day. Now it seems to take all year to make it mostly back. And so this is for my friends all over. A new year. Year the long shot comes home. The year letters pour in, full of good word that never got as far as you before. The year lovers come to know a good thing when they find it in the press of familiar flesh. Walk out onto the planet tonight. Even the moon is giving back your share of borrowed light, and you take it back in the name of everything you can't take back in your life. Imagine yourself filling with it, letting yourself go and floating through the skeleton trees to your place at the top of the sky. And here's the best part, coming last, just after all your practice shows of faith. Even now, while you're still salvaging what passes for resolve, remember this. No matter what else happens, this year you'll never go without. It's no small thing you've been in line for. This bowl and spoon finally passed to you. So, to start off at the beginning, the first stanza kind of starts out at the beginning of the year when we're hopeful, and it mentions how the odds are kind of stacked up against us every year, and what we want being that of a year of smooth, a year of easy smile, and then he goes on. But this, to me, is a way of him setting up the rest of the poem, and it tells the reader that the rest of the poem is not exactly going to be the way that you expect it. And I think that's really smart structurally, because at the beginning, it starts out kind of at the beginning of a year when your expectations are new and you have high hopes, and then it ends at the end of a year, and then it details everything that happens between and all the bad things that can happen. So I think that's really smart to structure the poem like that. And then just in this first stanza, I thought the repetition of the phrase a year emphasized the yearning and pleading almost for a good year by repeating it, followed by a thing that they wish they could get, which they end up not getting. So kind of sets up that tone for the rest of the poem until it gets hopeful towards the end. Now getting in to the next stanza, it right away signals to me a change in tone that was foreshadowed in the first stanza when it says, mostly the letter you're expecting never come. Mostly the letters you're expecting never come, and this meaning that the people you want to talk to never respond. And this idea continues when Clewell writes, "Lovers walk out, and in no time they're no friends of yours." And for the rest of the stanza, it kind of goes on with things that can happen and have happened to people, like a tire blown out, someone's heart caving in, the hole worn finally through the roof. And then the last few lines of the stanza, it gets a bit more serious when Clewell writes, "Sometimes it's only a few tenacious cells digging in against complete resolve. The smallest strain of DNA stretched thin over thousands of years goes taut and finally holds." And I took this to mean cancer, or basically anything that can happen to you that can destroy your life. But directly here, it's kind of referencing cancer. And as it says, like how one cell can become taut and destroy ruin your year or your life after not being present for generations. And this stanza stands out for me for showing the multitude of bad things that can happen to someone in the year without them expecting them to happen, and the varying severity of those things. And at this point in the poem, it's continuing to set up the bad things that can happen to someone during a year before eventually turning more hopeful in tone. So in the third stanza, it starts off by saying, "I've watched men at the mission staring out in the middle distance, putting up with the latest version of salvation, all the time wondering just how long until the bowl and spoon." And these lines to me have a lot to unpack, because initially when I read this was one of the lines that I couldn't really make sense of. So the way I took it was, the men at the mission are those people who are putting themselves out there to help others. And this whole time they're wondering how long it will be until someone reaches out and helps them. And this bowl and spoon is the ability to be helped and feast on the good things a year or life has to offer. And then the next three lines explain more how these same people hold out for hope so long because they don't see why they can't make it there themselves. And then the last half of this stanza gives a great metaphor for life using a tree. When Clewell writes, "Each year cuts our lives down to size, to something we can almost use. And then in our hearts we find that another ring shows up when we lay the cross section, when we lay open the cross section." And this all ties back into the theme by demonstrating that good or bad, the years will stay with you and make you who you are. Like when trees gain a ring every year, it's evidence that years have gone by and they've grown. And the last two lines also drive this theme home by using a hand as a metaphor for being worn and aged, when Clewell writes, "One more hard line in the hand spreading slowly out of its clench." So that kind of ties back into that theme. And then the first few lines of the fourth stanza get into how the world seems to get increasingly complicated, and it's hard to keep connections you once had, when Clewell writes about how the world was once traversable in one day, but now it almost takes a year. He gets deeper into how things when he says, "The letters pour in, the year's lovers come to know a good thing when they find it in the press of familiar flesh." And I think he's trying to drive home how life gets increasingly hard and people have that yearning for old connections that make them feel like they're in the good old days. The next half of the stanza gets into the more hopeful tone, beginning to emphasize the light at the end of the tunnel part of the theme. When Clewell writes, "Walk out onto the planet tonight, even the moon is giving back your share of borrowed light, and you take it back in the name of everything you can't take back in your life." And to me, this is referencing preparing for the new year with new motivations, almost like getting your energy back to give this next year everything you have and try to reach all your goals. And also, he gets into the idea of having an open mind and just kind of going with things when he writes, "Imagine yourself filling with it, letting yourself go and floating through the skeleton trees to your place at the top of the sky." And he's trying to hint at that the way to go is just keeping an open mind, and going through the new year with an open mind will let you rise above all your old aspirations and reach goals and dreams that you didn't think you could. So now in the last stanza, this is probably the most interesting stanza to me, as it brings everything full circle. Clewell writes, "And here's the best part coming last, just after all your practice shows of faith, even now while you're still salvaging what passes for resolve. Remember this, no matter what else happens, this year you'll never go without." Clewell is basically saying that after all your prayers and hard work, you're still left wondering, will this be enough for salvation, peace, and a good life? And he then emphasizes the silver lining, that no matter what else happens this year, you'll never go without. I think this is extremely important because he's saying that you may have the absolute worst year, but there's still a positive in that because it'll shape you and mold you into what makes you you, and give you the experience to tackle the next year with everything you have, and with that past experience you'll be able to tackle anything. And then Clewell closes out the poem with, "It's no small thing you've been in line for, this bowl and spoon finally passed to you." And this is saying that eventually you'll be able to be helped and feel the caring of others while enjoying a life molded by past hardships, which I think drives home the theme of the entire story in a nice full circle way. I really like this poem. I think it's extremely interesting, and I hope you guys like it. Thank you for watching.